Hello, everybody. Greetings. It's Chapo coming through. It's me, Will, here with a bonus episode, as promised from earlier in the week, talking about immigration policy. And joining me, of course, I believe it was your second or third appearance? Third times. Okay, breaking out that challenge coin, three-time appearance.
Yeah. What's the prize?
You get a challenge coin. It's a three-time Chapo appearance. You know? And then, if you get up to like Derek Davison numbers, you get like a trophy. But yeah, this is our friend Karina Moreno, and you have the unique distinction. I wouldn't say unique distinction, but I would say a dubious distinction, or rather a remarkable achievement, is that you have managed to read all 324 pages of the new 353 pages of the new Biden immigration reform bill.
Yeah.
And I want to get into what is in this new bill that's good, what's in there that's not good, or what should be in it rather. But first, I want to talk about just immigration in general, like now in like the third month of the new Biden administration. Obviously, right. Immigration was a hot topic in the previous administration, who rose to power largely about fear mongering around the issue of the crisis at our border. And wouldn't you know it though? I look in the media now today, and the big story that's in all the headlines is a crisis at the border. Yeah. There's an ongoing crisis at the border. So, I just want to I think on this Sunday, ABC's This Week, they had their weekly roundtable that was on the U.S.-Mexico border, where they were sitting socially distanced by a border wall, talking about in the heart of an emerging crisis for the Biden administration. And I just want to just kick things off by asking, what do people mean when they talk about a crisis at the border or an immigration crisis? And is there actually a crisis going on right now at the border, or is this just a media way to sort of puff up Republican talking points and create controversy for a new Biden administration?
Okay, so let's break it down. The government itself created a crisis, so it's a self-manufactured crisis of immigration at the border. This started in the 80s, the same way that Reagan did the war on drugs, where it was a completely disproportionate response, was the way that the border just kept getting more attention, and then by both parties. I think it was just 2 election cycles before both parties started saying the same thing. So is there a crisis? Yes, because the government made one.
What are the features of this crisis? Or is what you talk about when you say that there's a crisis, is that something different than what the media and politicians say when they talk about the crisis at the border?
Right. So I'm talking about something different. I'm talking about the truth. So during labor shortages in World War II, immigrants from Mexico were allowed to come back and forth because they were labor shortages. And then American policy has really backfired in the sense that in agriculture, agricultural workers would come seasonally and then leave. They didn't want to stay here permanently. And it's just so ironic that by immigration policies that were set in place, it ended up taking away that possibility where you could come, work seasonally, and then leave. So undocumented people that were here working, they were stuck. They couldn't go, they couldn't go back home. I think that's also something that a lot of people don't know and don't think about. This was a thing that was working until it was politicized. We have the story of ongoing escalation of just more punitive responses, and they have to, each election cycle, they have to outdo each other, right? So that's why Donald Trump's presidency is a failure, because he didn't go past Obama in deportations. I'm kidding. But there is an actual crisis, because Trump is gone, but his stay in Mexico, the MPP program. So anyone seeking asylum that made it to the border, Trump just said no.
Well, a lot of his policy is based on deterring people from seeking asylum at the border by making the process as onerous, painful, and cruel as possible. But has that changed now in the turnover in the administrations?
So during Trump, they started, when this MPP thing kicked in and no one can get across, no, you have to wait in Mexico. People set up tents, and this is still there, even with COVID. People are just there waiting to see if something will change now with the Biden administration, to try again if they were denied. But I mean, that is a crisis that that Mexico has no infrastructure to house asylum seekers coming from Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador.
Well, you talk about like Mexico not having the infrastructure. I mean, a big issue, at least like in terms of like the politics of this issue, is the infrastructure that America has to deal with this, crisis in quotation marks of people seeking asylum in the country or crossing a border without the proper, permits to do so. And like that infrastructure that we're talking about is the kids in cages, which is like this was a big talking point during the election.
Michelle Obama.
Yeah, this is like the
said
most
that at the convention.
Yeah. So what did she? So she said like we can't have kids in cages on the border. Yeah.
And I'm just like, okay, wait. The Obama administration created family incarceration, but that sound bites. People didn't ask questions. Like
the feature that got that was the most probably unspeakable of Trump's policy was the family separation.
Yeah.
And like have the Democrats at Biden now, they've stopped family separation?
No.
Or no? Okay. So yeah, apparently the kids are apparently still in cages, but now everyone in the media who got so angry about it before are now calling them, no, they're not in cages anymore. They're in temporary holding facilities.
I mean, yes, and they're in there longer. So by law, I mean, according to age, right? But you have like really, really young children. They shouldn't be held more than, I don't know, something like 72 hours. And I've like downloaded all this data for Homeland Security. No, they keep them way, way longer than that. The Biden administration hasn't changed anything. A lot of what he's done, a lot of, and people would applaud him for just simply starting to reverse the long list of stuff that Trump did. But I think it's easy to say. I don't think it's necessarily easy to actually implement. Like, I don't know. I think it's a cruel system, and that's not going to change.
So what are we to make of these like recent photos that have been like heavily circulated that show conditions at these border detainment facilities or temporary holding locations, whatever you want to call them, whatever euphemism is currently being used, that seem to be identical to the same photos that got everyone so angry when Trump was in the White House? I mean, like, what are we to make of this now? And like, I mean, if the conditions are the same, then like, what has changed in immigration policy?
I mean, immigration policy is a, partisan issue where they both are invested in a cruel system. I think that people are not like angry and upset. It's just that they don't really care. I mean,
I'm quoting from CBS News here. On Friday, Paul Wise, a court-appointed doctor charged with monitoring conditions faced by migrant children in U.S. custody, told U.S. District Court Judge Dolly G. that he found, quote, profound overcrowding at the Donna holding facility and other CPB stations in South Texas that he toured last week. So here's my question. I mean, like the argument that I think defenders of the Biden administration or defenders of like Democrats in power will make is that like, look, we need to put these people somewhere. We need to put these children somewhere. Like, these are the facilities that we have. We're trying to make them better, but like we simply can't, just ignore that they're here, or like not take care of them at all, or not keep track of them at all. And I guess I'm wondering is like, why do we need these facilities in the first place? Like, once you've sort of documented the fact that someone is, in the country illegally or without a visa or however you want to call it.
And just pause, because they are asylum seekers. Like, they are, who we're talking about, they're asylum seekers. They are escaping, they're fleeing persecution and violence in their countries, right? Like, it's not the average border crosser who
so like that's why they're in the facilities, because they've been like turned themselves in essentially to be like, I'm seeking asylum.
Yeah, they're held. So people don't get this, right? Like, this is not fun. You get to the border, you say you're seeking asylum, and you're not sent to the Holiday Inn. Like, you are sent to one of these facilities.
And it's like it's the images we've seen are like chain link fences in these giant warehouses, and people given this sort of like aluminum foil blankets that they hand you at the end of a marathon or something like that. Like, like that's the and then you're held there essentially indefinitely. But I guess like my point is like, after your claim for asylum has been registered, like you've been your name and some contact has been processed for you, why not just basically let them go into America, because where they presumably already have family, relatives, friends, someone already living in this country for quite some time? Like, that there's a community there that they could fit into,
Yeah.
or have some support network to, to go on their life, and then would give them just a hearing date for like an immigration court.
Right. So there's a few things. They don't let them out that fast because I guess like a number of industries are making money while they're held, even though it's, that marathon blanket. Two, the immigration system is completely overburdened. Like it has no gas. I mean, Biden is adding judges or something, but it's not enough. The backlog is tremendous. People always go to their hearing though. So yes, you could release them. They will go to their hearing. It's like over 90%, for the last, I don't know how many years. I'm sure that's, something to invest in, like the bracelets or something. Like I predict like there'll soon be more of that, because the Biden proposal says like alternatives to detention, and it's going to be some way of like technology surveilling you.
So what, like an ankle monitor or something like that?
Yeah.
Like when an ankle monitor for like house arrest is supposed to contain you in one location, like would this be some sort of roaming ankle monitor to keep track of you? I mean, that doesn't seem very humane either.
No, because I mean, there's a stigma attached to it. Like, how are you supposed to get, like
employed, or I don't know, or just
So yeah, it's a mess. But when they said alternatives to detention, like this is what I'm thinking.
How does in terms of the Biden immigration reform bill that's currently being debated, or I mean hasn't passed yet?
No.
I mean, like, what is it? What is in this immigration reform bill? Like in the text of it, like it's not all bad. So like, what in it would you say that is good or like needed? Should it be passed?
Okay, so there are a few things that are not bad and new. So, for example, it actually acknowledges that, the previous policies have been harmful and painful for families. It also revises the terminology in anything like legislation that has to do with immigration. So it proposes using the word non-citizen instead of alien. So I thought that was nice. And it also, for the first time, mentions climate change, like how there will be refugees and asylum seekers due to climate change.
But does it like codify any of what the United States' responsibilities would be, like vis-a-vis to those people who are made refugees by climate change or economic deprivation?
Yeah, so thank you. That's the biggest difference. Root causes has been included in previous proposals, but some were in an appendix at the back. This time, root causes is very much like at the center and the focal point of the proposal. So I think that is, many years of a lot of organizing that got that done. So yeah, they mentioned this, right? Like root causes, which of course we know have to do with foreign intervention and free trade.
Well, I mean, you say you told me that a curious omission in the immigration bill is that the word Mexico is not mentioned even once in it. In terms of like, immigration policy is not just about like what America does to people seeking to enter this country for whatever reason. It's about the countries that they're coming from as well.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, like, obviously, like NAFTA has played a huge role in this back in the 90s. But like, I mean, should the goal of immigration policy be to accommodate as many people as possible who want to come into this country? Or should it be to create conditions in the countries that they're leaving that maybe that they would choose not to leave if they had the choice?
Right. So they're trying to do that. They're finally sort of realizing that there are certain conditions, like certain material conditions that lead to migrant flows. Like they mention investing in like after school programs and things like that. So very local programs in El Salvador, Honduras.
Wait, so like
Guatemala.
they're investing in after school programs for kids, like the Police Athletic League in El Salvador. Like that's gonna keep people in their home countries and like not seeking desperately to come to it, risking their lives to come to America.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, this.
Yeah. So I mean, and this time, how much did he say? So Biden put away like $8 billion on this, When he was vice president, it was $750 million that went to each country per year. And it had, I mean, okay, now we know the answer like years later. It had no impact. It had no effect. Like it didn't stop people from fleeing their countries, their homes.
And I mean, like I think what gets lost in like it just seems to be like, I think the way a lot of people talk on like both the left and right about immigration is this idea that like economic migrants or refugees or people who take it upon themselves to like risk their lives to travel hundreds of miles to cross a border illegally or to seek asylum in a country fleeing from one in which their life is in danger is incredibly dangerous and difficult to do. So like the reason that you would do that is like,
because you're fucking scared.
Yeah, because because like this is life or death. I mean, like, and like the idea is like, I think people just think that like, oh, like America is so great. Like, who wouldn't? If you're a liberal, you're like, oh, America is such a wonderful country. Who wouldn't want to come here? We should like let everyone come to America. That's great. And if you're a right winger, you're like, oh, our country is so great, but it's being taken away because we're letting in all these moochers and criminals who are going to take away what makes our country great. Where it's just like, okay, like, I mean,
exactly.
what they mean is like what makes our country great is that there's like, jobs or money here to be had. But like, other than that, it's
good
like,
schools.
It's not so great. And if you're from, Honduras or El Salvador, like, ideally you wouldn't want to leave your country. You'd be like connected to your community or family or the place you grew up, or there'd be like a job or a future in those countries, which have been, like that's why like no one is just dying to come to America because of what a fucking nice and wonderful country it is.
It's painful. Yeah. It's painful. Yeah. It's very painful. Like no one wants to leave that behind.
I mentioned earlier the role in of a previous era, like with the NAFTA regime and like what that meant to immigration, at least as far as from like Mexico and Central America. Because you describe the effects of like the role NAFTA played in immigration and like immigration policy in America and Mexico.
It just destroyed the farm work sector in our own country. So we couldn't sell our corn, which is our like that's our one thing. And I don't know, Walmart came in and had a better price. So it just devastated the farm sector.
So free trade allowed for like corporations like Walmart to buy corn on a global market, like cheaper without like to import it like without tariffs or taxes in such a way that undercut virtually every like small like agricultural community or farm or sector of employment in Mexico itself. Like for the entire like large rural parts of Mexico, which is like most of the country where most people are involved in like agricultural.
It was cheaper from
and also fishing too as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know too much about that one, but yeah, I mean, it that still really gets me. It escalated the use or like the scope and size of the black market
for human trafficking. For shepherding people across the border. I mean, like the drug cartels control all of that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It's like this. You have open borders for commerce, right? Like you can.
So money can traverse across the U.S.-Mexico border.
Yeah,
capital flows totally unimpeded.
Without,
but like the necessity that creates is it means the freer money or capital is able to traverse international borders, the harder that those countries have to make it for people to do the same thing.
Yeah. So always open for commerce, but never like for people.
10,000 tractor trailer trucks going back and forth every minute of the day.
Oh,
but people
nonstop.
It's like you gotta crack down on that because like of the economic dislocations caused by free trade. Like it's just like it is this perverse thing where like money is given absolute freedom and people are ever more brutally policed, surveilled, incarcerated, and now as we see the result of that,
died,
people and children in cages.
Yeah. I mean, the United States response every time has been the same, like more of the same escalation, right? Like you just militarize the border even more, and now with technology, I mean, it's like military equipment, like drones and shit. So you don't actually need the border patrol everywhere. You have like all these other gadgets to do that for you. And with that risk, like the smugglers, that they pass that risk on to whoever, is paying to, like cross the desert and get here.
I mean, it's like in terms of immigration policy, it's like it's an interesting issue because like as the Biden administration is begins to get going, and it's like they've done they seem to be like a lot of people are giving them credit for how fast they're moving to like spend a lot of money on the economy and stimulus spending and infrastructure bill and things like that.
Was that fast?
Yeah, it was, I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you're still waiting for your stimmy check, keep waiting, I guess. But the point is, though, like, when a lot of people complain about, like, why isn't Biden or why isn't his administration doing X, Y, or Z, the response you'll get is that, like, look, how do you get Joe Manchin to vote for it? How do you get it through Congress and the Senate? You got to, like, take these trade-offs. He's hamstrung in by a lot of things, like judges and things like that. But the thing is, on immigration policy, it really is one of the, like, immigration and drug policy, actually, are like two big areas in which the executive branch is given pretty much unlimited authority. Like, he does not need Congress's approval to do almost any of this stuff. So, like, it is just a matter of his own individual, not political reality, but his and his administration's individual political will. So based on, like, knowing what we know about, like, that, the things he could do with a stroke of a pen, like, what does it tell you about what Joe Biden actually believes about what is a good immigration policy? Right.
The priority is not, like, what's a good policy. The priority is how to do this in a way that's, like, still perceived as favorable, that he's seen in a good light, that he's not, that he's fair, I guess, and there's also, like, all the stuff on crime, stuff on this, whatever. I think it's a matter of, like, political gains, really. And to do a policy that would actually be good would be very, I mean, you'd lose a lot of political capital.
Because it would be seen as just giving all these favors to people who aren't American citizens, and, like, when.
Yeah. First of all, like, for most people, it's abstract, right? Like, if you're in Iowa or whatever, like, you have very strong opinions on welfare and immigration and blah, 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 even though it's not exactly close to you. But there's this strong perception, like, it's very strongly associated because it's been decades now that we criminalize immigrants. So, yeah, he would lose political points because he legalized all the criminals, or I mean, I don't know how to word it exactly, but along those lines.
How does the new immigration bill, how does it deal with things like a path to citizenship, or like DACA, or like the Dreamers?
So DACA, the TPP, so with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which are predominantly Latino countries, they would be immediately eligible for this pathway. The pathway is 3 different status. So the first segment is 6 years. You start off with lawful prospective status, LPI. So you have LPI for 6 years.
And this applies to everyone from a country that is part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership?
And DACA. And because of COVID, an essential worker.
So if you're an essential worker from one of those countries attempting to enter America, you will be granted this LPI, lawful prospective immigration status, which lasts for how long? 6 years, you said?
6 years.
And then what happens at the end of 6 years? And, like, those 6 years, that means that you can, like, live and work in America.
You could travel.
You can return to your home country if you want to do, and then come back.
Yeah. DACA immediately would be eligible. But this is a whole thing before a green card. So, yeah, you can't vote. You're allowed residency and you're allowed to work. It's work authorization.
But is there a path to citizenship? Like, what happens when that 6 years is up?
If you have no felonies, I mean, it's a felony or 3 misdemeanors. So as long as you don't have those and your national security background checks out, you can move on to legal resident status with the green card. This goes on for 3 years before you can apply for naturalization.
And this is an improvement over a previous immigration regime, would you say? In that there is, like, there's some, like, that LPI status, it's like, it's an acknowledgement that, like, yes, like, all these people are living and working here, and may not be citizens or, legal residents yet, but they are, should be afforded some level of, I don't know, like status or protection, or they can't just be, kicked out or rounded up and thrown out of the country.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Like, it's very vague on what happens. I mean, what happens if you get pulled over? What happens if you have an IRS audit? And you're still very, very...
It's a very precarious situation to be in.
Yeah. And it's the longest. It's the one that lasts the longest.
You read here, I mean, in the piece you wrote about it, you also talk about, like, the last big comprehensive immigration reform actually was passed 35 years ago. And it was Ronald Reagan's Immigration Reform and Control Act in 1986, which legalized about 2.7 million undocumented immigrants. and made it a crime to knowingly employ an undocumented worker. Like, is this was like in our lifetimes here, like back in the 80s under the Reagan administration, like what was like the framework for that immigration reform? Was this just like an acknowledgement of like how many businesses and capitalists needed these like undocumented guest workers?
That's so great because that's exactly it. Like, it made it a crime to knowingly, right? Like in quotation marks.
But you don't have to ask anyone either.
Yeah.
So it's just like, if you don't know about it, don't ask, don't tell is kind of the framework.
No, I mean, it was completely toothless. Like, there was no real punishment or like consequence to the employer, right? Like, the employee would be fucked, but the company was fine. And that started a long string of the same stuff of like the onus, like the burden is on the person. And that's why it didn't really change anything. Like, you can use different, like there are a bajillion ways to work or to show like an employer something good enough to work and get by. Yeah, it's meant to protect employers.
And I remember in the George W. Bush administration in his second term, he wanted to do another big immigration reform bill, and like the right wing like killed him for that. he squandered a lot of political capital, and I think honestly like they kind of led directly to the rise of Donald Trump, and that like they discovered that like, oh wait, Republican voters, leaving aside the ones who like own and run multinational corporations or have small businesses that require undocumented like low paid immigrant labor, actually don't want immigration reform at all. They want the opposite. They want immigrants out of this country. And Trump was like the first one who came along who actually just said that out loud, and he blew away all the other Republican opponents based on the power of that appeal.
Yeah. I mean, that's the soundbite. Like, that's what they say, right? Like, we don't want the other, they're taking advantage, they're raping my daughter. But the truth is, like, they will never actually let go of the US has an addiction to cheap labor, free labor. Like, it's not going to stop.
Hey, it's what this country was founded on, and it's what made us great.
Yeah.
I just like another thing that like another sort of promise from the Biden administration was a 100-day moratorium on all deportations. That has been halted by a federal judge. So like, what's been going on? I mean, obviously people are still being deported.
Yeah.
So I mean, was it foolish of Biden to make that promise, or do you think he had any intention of like following up on it?
Yeah, I think it was a moment like we can all jerk off and calm at the same time, because he just announced. I think that was the whole point, just announcing it. Like, I don't necessarily think that anyone cared to follow through with that. And then judge blocked it anyway. And meanwhile, even before it was blocked, they were still deporting. It's also like shows how it's very racist. Like, they were still deporting Black people, Black Haitian immigrants.
So like, like when they only think about it in terms of like the kids in cages at the borders, but like there was still like, if they arrive on a raft from Haiti, like no one thinks about it or cares.
Yeah.
And so like those are free to be deported. That's not a crisis. That's not something that stains our national soul because look at these beautiful children or whatever.
It's it's almost like like the scope. Like they were outside the boundaries. Like, you don't count. So business as usual. I mean, in the deportations that were happening to, sending people back to Haiti, there were a bunch of children. I saw like one headline on like the youngest one was 2 years old. So.
2 years old. And that 2-year-old was sent back to Haiti.
Yeah.
Jesus. So we mentioned like some things that are, minor improvements in our immigration policy that like, should this bill pass? But what are some of its inadequacies? Okay, well, we'll get to that. We'll get to your predictions on whether, but like, assuming it does pass or would pass, like you mentioned a few things that are minor improvements over our like current system, but like, what are some of the glaring inadequacies or things that are still missing from this legislation, or just the way we think and talk about immigration as a problem in general?
So, okay, let's see. It's not enough of a paradigm shift, right? Like, even if it's the first to mention XYZ, it's not enough to like really change the system. It doesn't say anything about detention, deportations, like policing, all the triggers that happen here, just when you...
So we're not abolishing ICE is what you're saying?
No.
Okay.
No, like that's not at all, like it's not addressed at all.
About how old is ICE as a federal law enforcement agency?
Created in 2003.
2003. So this is like a Homeland Security post 9/11 thing. So it's like the idea that like, oh, what would we do if ICE didn't exist? And it was like, I don't know, like we spent 40, 50, 60 years without it before. Like it wasn't didn't see it, not saying everything was great then, but like what is the rationale for having an ICE agency rather than just a border patrol or immigration and customs?
Because
I guess they are immigration and customs enforcement, but you like a federal agencies that already exist to deal with like the border and immigration.
But you need one for the one that snuck in and is here.
The one who's got like the thing is like like once they've gotten across the border, then you need this like this federal law enforcement agency like the FBI that can go anywhere at any time and snatch people out of like their home or place of employment.
So
what is like the threat that people think is like by allowing people to continue to like live and work here, that we need like an FBI style law enforcement agency specifically for undocumented people,
and it's enforced by local police. Like that's the thing that I also like. I want to like ICE is police too, because the police on the local cops report shit in the database that goes to Homeland Security and ICE, and that's how they are able to pick up as many people as they can. Like that's not going to change. Biden's not going to change that. The one thing that Biden will change maybe is like where they do these, like pickups during Trump. So during Trump, there were some very elaborate ways.
Yeah, I mean, I remember seeing right here in New York City, like not like ICE, like a federal agency, we're going around to like knocking down people's doors in Queens with like a tank.
Oh yeah,
there's like having an armored personnel carrier of like fully SWAT kitted ICE agents raiding houses and businesses right here in New York City.
Yeah,
to combat the threat of some guy like who like works at a deli or something like.
Yeah. I mean, I love your question of like what, like they don't represent a threat, right? I would say it's like a symbolic thing that people are scared of. Like we're going to lose our culture. We're going to lose our language. Like we're going to start talking Tex-Mex or something. Like that's like people really do say these things.
I mean, it's frightening to think that like, if that's the threat, the idea that people think it could, like something like that could be could be counteracted with basically people with guns.
We're gonna all have to have a quinceañera.
Yeah. Just all that Latin explosion of the late '90s and early 2000s. It's being memory hold. We're getting rid of it. All those Shakira albums. They're being disappeared. We're taking them off the internet.
Yeah. No more tamales for Christmas. Yeah. I mean, this is the only thing that makes sense, because they instill fear. Like it's still the other, and they still want to make it clear that. The power dynamic. This is our
country, like that you're, to the extent that you're here at all, it's by our
because we let
goodwill, or exactly.
Yeah.
That could be rescinded at any given moment.
And so they show that off sometimes, but they don't, like they'll never do that where they get rid of everyone, because
then our economy would suffer.
Exactly.
So ICE isn't going away, but like it just in general, in terms of what you think of, like just in terms of how we conceive of immigration as a problem to be solved, or like the extent to which it causes sort of tension in our American society between lower wage workers and then like who they are sort of at odds with an immigrant population who would theoretically undercut their wages, but in terms of I guess what I'm asking is what would like a humane immigration policy on for both the countries, both for America and the people already living here or who want to live here, and then more importantly for the people in the countries who are coming to the countries that they're coming from.
I mean, that would require going back in time and not disrupting their countries. Like they've backed a lot of non-democratic.
I mean, if we're so concerned about people coming from El Salvador, maybe we shouldn't have literally destroyed that country in the 80s, and then not just destroyed it, but put in charge of it the most ruthless, violent psychos in that country. That's exactly what they're going to keep doing. And it was funny. All the countries which we're most concerned about where immigrants are coming from, it's Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Yeah. What do those three countries have in common in their very recent history? The answer is genocidal, dirty wars funded by this country in the 1980s. Not ancient history, very recently and in the past. And the U.S. will continue. That's why this thing won't work. The U.S. will continue to
propose we need someone there, like at a post. We need leadership that prioritizes like American businesses, business interests. So,
given that going back in time and altering history is not yet an option available to us, like given the situation that exists like right now, like if you could propose some additions or changes to it in a proposed immigration bill, like what would it look like in your eyes?
it's gonna sound weird, but it's weird to think about because
Seems like such a remote possibility.
like it would never happen. Like even this that is, somewhat better than previous reforms proposed, like this isn't going to pass. I really focus on the issue of deservingness.
So you talk about like the way we conceive of immigration is like who deserves to come to America,
right? Like the whole dreamers, and DACA. Like there was supposed to be DACA and DAPA, like the parents.
Oh right, yeah.
And I guess like that would be the number one priority for me. Like I guess now it's like a magic wand and I can do whatever I want. Like I would change like the way that immigrants are perceived, the way that they've been socially constructed over decades, and so it's very hard to change anyone's mind. Like facts are not going to do that. Yeah, and take away this notion of like the dreamers because they're innocent.
Yeah, like they all got straight A's in school.
Yeah.
They're on the band. The sports team is just like, well, what if there's some like mediocre, shitty kids? Like, do they still get to? What are the kids who just kind of suck? Like that no one likes. And I mean, like, do they still get to stay here?
I mean,
like, and then you're right. What about their parents?
Yeah,
because like obviously, if they have been born in this country, or I mean, not born, they'll be like came here when they were very young, for all intents and purposes, have lived here their entire life. They have no connection whatsoever to Mexico or El Salvador or other Central American countries, or theoretically any country that they could have been taken to as like a very small child. Like, but then so like, oh, okay, like generously, like you can stay here. We're going to acknowledge it's too cruel to just send you back to a place you've never really lived. But your parents, though, they got to go.
Yeah. And it took me a long time because at first it's like, cool, the dreamers, like, yeah, the dreamers have to get their thing.
We all love to dream, don't we?
And I think Obama really fucked that up with, I think, like people stopped organizing for the Dream Act because he gave them DACA, right? Which was a short solution.
And what did DACA actually do? Like, just to remind people, like, what was that?
It was a 2-year program where essentially you were safe from being deported unless you committed a violent, awful crime.
And like, is that? I mean, it's only 2 years though. I mean, like,
it's only 2 years, and I don't know how much it cost, but it was expensive too. Like you had to renew it every 2 years. Trump was very dedicated to undoing. Like he tried 1,000,000 times to get rid of it, to undo it, but.
I mean, like, just go back to Trump for a second. Like, I think like everybody recognizes now with like Trump and like Stephen Miller, like his little Goebbels in the fucking White House, that like, these guys are, and the thing is, it's not any secret. They're quite open about it. They talk about it. They're happy to tell you about it. That they're like the entire purpose of their like, seemingly inhumanly cruel immigration policies, like child separation, and just is to make it as painful as possible to try to enter this country, to deter people that when you send them back, the idea is like, oh, they're going to tell everyone when they get home, don't even try to enter America. It'd be better to stay here. It's so awful that I don't even want to imagine the type of depravity that was like inflicted upon people in these like privately run fucking like ICE concentration camps. But like my point is,
I mean, there's information, like there's a lot of like sexual
violence,
like quid pro quo with
exactly.
ICE dudes.
If you want a blanket, or if you want like this is,
and then people would volunteer, like neighborhood community people would volunteer and like drop off canned food, and then like people that were held in these centers would get like food that had gone bad and had maggots in it.
Or it's like, like when you see video of like people who are like volunteering to do so or working for the government, finding caches of water in the desert and just pouring them out, which is just literally saying like we would like more people to die crossing the border. And like, don't forget, the U.S.-Mexico border is like the most dangerous border to cross in the world. Like more people die trying to cross from the U.S.-Mexican border than like any other border in the world.
No
It's one of the
one.
biggest borders in the world, and it's by far one of the most dangerous.
Yeah.
And so like, yeah, like they just openly say like, no, like our policy is we would like more people to die attempting to enter America, because if enough of them do, then like less of them will try. Right. So like, I mean, that's open. That's out there. And, you know, everyone, it shocked the conscience of so many people in this
I
country.
think like Romney said that too. Like Mitt Romney in his day was like, we're going to make it so awful where you won't want to. I mean,
he's one of the good Republicans.
I know.
But,
Everyone,
you know, but like
everyone loves him now.
Those are the Republicans though. Like it's all sort of basically all in the open.
Yeah.
It shocked the conscience of this nation, or a good chunk of this nation, or at least they pretended to when the election was going on. But now we have a situation where, as we've just started talking about, it doesn't seem like the conditions facing asylum seekers or economic migrants have changed at all.
No,
and it just seems to be like
worse with COVID. They've gotten tremendously worse.
And it just seems to me like if you're a Republican, you have to look at like all the horrible conditions that these people are living, you know, being contained in now. And you point at Biden and you say, oh, like, what a hypocrite. Look at the media. Like when we were doing this, you know, we were the history's greatest monsters. And, you know, like they're not wrong. I mean, their attitude, though, is that, look, it's good. No, we want more of this. But like, you can't call us monsters when essentially the policy is producing the exact same results. It just seems to me like the only difference for Democratic administration or liberals who are just they were so outraged about kids in cages is that they're like, the same things are going to keep happening, but like officially our position is not that it's good, we want you to die, but officially we have to say no, we don't want you to die, we feel bad about this.
Yeah,
but that's really the only difference.
Yeah,
it's just how bad you personally feel as like an American when you're thinking about children, you know, sleeping in a cage.
Yeah, maybe right, like maybe hanging a little picture of that like in your house or something to show how guilty you feel,
or putting one of those like lawn signs that say like, we support immigrants in this house, we believe in science, we don't want kids in cages.
Science bitch.
Yes,
that's so good. Yeah, I mean that's not going to change, it's only going to get worse. $8 billion or something has been set aside. It's nothing. Like when they were giving 750 million per year, like it was a waste. It didn't do anything. So there's no reason to assume that it would make a difference now. And it also, so here's also like one thing that's new that's really weird. So aside from Mexico not being in it, which like there's some beef there. I think they just like these two administrations just talked, but AMLO didn't call Biden. Like AMLO didn't recognize like a Biden victory until
just because he knows it was stolen. He has the real data.
I mean, and he speaks very nicely of Mr. Trump, so like that's weird. But the second thing is these processing centers. Processing centers in your own country. So if you are in Honduras and you want to petition for asylum, you go to these processing centers and you wait in your own country until you get an answer.
So you have to, you're just hanging out in a processing center, waiting for the like, you know, fucking endless bureaucracy to like, which is designed to dissuade you from doing the thing you're trying to do. You know, deigns to notice you or process your form or whatever. And
it's not like the DMV in a day. No, like you go start paperwork and there's like not yet like a set of time of like how much will that be, days, will that be weeks, like what are we talking about? But to me it's just weird of like, okay, so you're supposed to wait in the place where like you're scared of being killed, like what? And also it's the same thing. Trump didn't want them to make it to the US border, right? And
because once they get here, it becomes our problem. And then people get mad when they see pictures of, you know, people and kids in cages, right?
Yeah.
But if they're just, you know, if it's El Salvador or like Honduras doing it, then it's like, well, that's not us. This is not our problem. Like, it's just we're not monsters. We love people. We respect human rights in this country.
I mean, it didn't say anything about like any sort of like detention center. Like that's not in there. It's just like you are processed in these designated centers that we're going to put in your country, and then you just like hang on until we give you an answer. But that's the same. I mean, how is that different from Trump's policy led to these fucking tents in the middle of a pandemic and like was awful. But this is also the same thing, like keeping people away from the U.S. border.
I guess just like finally here, you say that you were not optimistic about the chances of this immigration reform bill being passed at all. So this is all very theoretical. Thank you for listening for the last hour, by the way. But no, what do you think is going to come out of these negotiations, or is there going to be anything passed at all?
Okay, so maybe we can make a bet and see who wins. I mean, the history of immigration policy in this country is entirely piecemeal, and that's what I would tell. Like that's the answer. You were saying something about like the Democrats, like what would they say? Like that's the question that we should be asking them. Like, why is it an entirely piecemeal, like fragmented system that is also very controlled and surveilled? And like, we already know that no immigrant can get any sort of benefit because it was written in Bill Clinton's 1996, biggest hits, but it's still in this document, like it's still in there again. So just over and over. I think there'll be 3 bills. One for the dreamers, like DACA, one for agricultural workers and TPP, and the last one is because of COVID and the pandemic, the essential worker.
So if you're an undocumented essential worker, there would be a bill for you?
2/3 of essential workers are undocumented.
And
We're deemed essential.
Of like currently in America?
Yeah.
2/3?
2/3.
And like that covers like home health care workers or?
Oh, yeah. A lot
of other fields as well, I would imagine.
So 29,000 dreamers work in healthcare. So, I mean, we had an opportunity like for this to be a labor conversation instead of an immigrant conversation, and I think we really missed that opportunity.
What would it sound like if we did have a more labor-based understanding or like discussion about immigration?
So I think there's been some positive shift and like perception on essential workers and immigrants, right? Like people are more open because they know that the person delivering their Postmates is likely undocumented. That's something that also has these like hints of inferiority. So what would it look like? I mean, we should be having a conversation where essential workers and the dreamers and agriculture, like they all have the same protections. The meat packing workers, like Trump, they didn't want to work. They didn't have any like PPP like protection, and Trump not only deemed them essential and made them work, but he also cut their pay, like negotiated like their pay cuts during the pandemic. So what would it look like? It would look this like it would just be the same among the different categories.
So there wouldn't be this like categorization of like of what trance you fit into. It would be a unified actually comprehensive immigration reform bill, rather than this like you said, targeted at like these are the high school kids who came here very young. These are the essential workers our economy needs because every rich asshole in the media wants their DoorDash delivered to them.
Yeah.
And then and these are the the people seeking asylum or agricultural workers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we need them because everyone needs strawberries in January, right?
Yeah. I mean, there would be the same protections and they'd be able to unionize. Like that's the difference between Reagan and now, right? Like when Reagan did this, undocumented immigrants were very out of sight, and COVID changed that, right? Like now I think more people have come to terms with that. But still, it's still in this, like there's still a distance. It's still like it's just someone who is sort of anonymous and in sort of like a servile role to you. It's just like as long as the food shows up, exactly,
like, that's all you kind of care about.
Exactly.
But if they weren't bringing the food, I mean, like half the people in this fucking city would have killed themselves like 2 months into this pandemic.
Oh, yeah. I mean, definitely. I'm always amazed like how much people order out, but I was super excited once they started once they added cocktails.
Yeah.
Alcohol.
Well, that's what y'all need. Karina, do you have any closing thoughts or just anything you want to say to wrap this up?
I think you should shout out, your boy Chapo, El Chapo.
Well, he's now a permanent resident of the United States, and in
He's
Colorado. I suppose.
He's in Brooklyn.
Oh, yeah. Is he still in Brooklyn? I thought he was transferred because he was convicted. Well, then I will just say, Karina Moreno, thank you so much for reading this bill and trying to break it down for us and our audience. If anyone would like to find your ratings on these matters, where should they go?
You can find me on Twitter. So my handle is Kary in Brooklyn. Kary is Kary in Brooklyn. Emily in Paris copied me.
Karina, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.